Welcome to Adapted, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is...
Pat.
I want to start with a brief poem by a famous poet who did not win the Nobel Prize despite deserving it, and that is Wallace Stevens. And
I thought you were going to start with Sully Prudhomme and just
oh,
find
we have plenty
the
of
opposite.
time for
We could do
Sully.
the opposite. We could start with a poet who won the Nobel Prize. We couldn't find a poem of his worth reading.
I did read a few of his poems.
I read a few of his
today.
poems. It was very difficult
Yeah.
to find them because no
Yeah.
one's translated them.
Yeah, I found a few of them. And they are poems. I'm
They're
almost
poems.
sure of it. Yeah.
Well, let's go with Wallace.
Well, let's go with this.
This
This
is
is
quality.
yeah.
Wallace's actual quality.
This is Anecdote of the Jar, and this is the poem. I placed a jar in Tennessee, and round it was, upon a hill, it made this slovenly wilderness surround that hill. The wilderness rose up to it, and sprawled around, no longer wild. The jar was round upon the ground, and tall, and of a port in air. It took dominion everywhere. The jar was gray and bare. It did not give of bird or bush, like nothing else in Tennessee. And I thought that was a good poem to bring up at the beginning of this series on the Nobel Prize in Literature, because I think it highlights potentially some interesting questions or conflicts that arise with this prize. Is it really the honoring of some great aesthetic collection from some genius somewhere? Or is it that we have a group of people doing this semi-monarchical, aristocratic thing that are picking up a jar, putting it up as high as possible, and therefore investing in it dominion, giving it dominion everywhere? And I like that this jar is gray and bare.
I love that. I love
yeah.
Wallace Stevens.
Yeah.
He's wrote my favorite poem, one of my favorite poems ever, which is Emperor of Ice Cream. I
Yes.
love Emperor of Ice Cream.
Yeah, yeah.
I love Wallace
Let
Stevens.
be the let is be the reality of seem. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream.
The only emperor is the Emperor of Ice Cream.
Yeah, that's a great poem. But I think that might be something we're going to have to deal with on this. Is this idea of
What a really great poem to find for the beginning of this. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
Good start, man.
Yeah, thank you. But I think it brings up a lot of the conflicts,
Yeah.
and we'll see this today.
Really
with,
good. That was a perfect find.
With our survey of the prize, what it is and what it does is it seems to be this institution that we award something, and you could just pick the thing up, put it on the top of everyone else, put it above everyone else, up on high, and it takes dominion everywhere. And the question, I think, ends up being not so much, does this thing actually deserve to be up on high? Because many of the prizes, maybe even most of the prizes, are gray jars. They're just filled with air. They are going to be acknowledged simply by being placed up high. Some of them I think we will appreciate and see these as a work of genius or a genius and that genius's work. But I think the interesting question, or the more interesting question, ends up being, why are we doing this? Why are there millions millions of dollars invested in picking up a jar and putting it on top of a hill, metaphorically speaking? And I think that has something to do with why we are titling this series what we're titling it, which is The Last Aristocrats, the Nobel Prize in Literature, which is there is something in humankind that seeks out an aristocracy, that looks towards a nobility not necessarily from the past, but a nobility that is, by definition, above us, that outranks us, and that tells us what is meaningful, what is important, and that all of us can then look up towards and understand what our culture values and even what our culture is. With the science awards, this seems to be the advance of these various fields, especially with physics. It might be just, but it's also very hard to understand. With peace, it's a little closer to, I think, the human experience. We all seem to be able to say something about the Peace Prize in any given year if we have enough research on it.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I agree.
Maybe.
Sometimes people are like, I have no idea who that person is,
Well,
especially in recent years. In
but you
recent
can
years, that seems
look
to be
it
more.
up. Yeah, you can look it up,
True,
read about it, and have an opinion. It's harder to
true,
do that with the work of Max Planck or of Paul Dirac in physics. It's
true.
really hard to do that with chemistry, where even
Yeah, we learned
knowing,
that from that chapter in this book.
yeah, chemistry is a bear of a field to understand. The economics prize is stupid, and we'll just leave it there. It's a
Yeah, the
dumb,
economics
dumb thing
prize
to
is
do.
stupid. The
Yeah.
medicine prize is, I mean, the medicine prize is actually fine. The
Mhm.
chapter is really weird in the book
Yeah.
because he makes a, I don't know if you notice it, he makes a lot of errors. There's a number of errors.
Does he?
Yeah, weird errors. Like some of them, it feels like that chapter needed a really good editor. Maybe we'll briefly deal with some of the other chapters, but that one was weird. He makes like some basic science errors. Like he says things like he's like, and then when the DNA, a lot of it just feels like it's just ripped from like a. He for some reason can't seem to find enough to talk about with the Nobel laureate, so he spends a lot of time discussing biology and genetics, and he just kind of. But at one point he goes, and then the DNA, pairs off, and adenine pairs with guanine, and cytosine pairs with thymine, and I'm like, nope, they don't. Like that's wrong. Like he just
Mhm.
got the pairs wrong, or he's got like a weird analogy where he messes up the Rosetta Stone. Like
Mhm.
there's just weird things where I'm like, man, you just needed the fact checker on that chapter. So
Mhm.
that one's weird. But the prize seems okay for medicine.
Yeah, the main conflict he brings up in that chapter is the difference between practice and research, kind of lab medicine versus doctors who are actually in the field. He doesn't get
Which
into that,
is
which
fine. Like
it's yeah. I don't really yeah. I think that's perfectly fine thing to say.
fine. And some of them are researchers and some of them are people out in the field. Like the only Nobel Prize winner from our alma mater was a Nobel. He was a surgeon. He won the Nobel Prize for being a surgeon. There's a number of the medicine chapter seems like overall they give awards for stupid things sometimes. It seems like they made a mistake on stuff, but that seems like okay, and we can get into that later. But overall, there do seem to be like, yeah, these things seem to have benefits to people and to mankind. The chemistry one sometimes is like for the discovery of Bakelite. Like, do we really needed to give an award for Bakelite? Like, there's just some of this stuff feels really random. Um,
Yeah, his argument in chemistry is the standard model of physics is what, 16 particles in it?
Whatever it is, yeah.
In chemistry, they're studying molecules, and at the time of the writing of the book, there's about 9 million of them. So, how in God's name do you survey this field and do it any kind of justice? So,
Yeah, I
there's,
think it sort of seems a remnant of like the 19th century when you had some chemists getting together being like, I made a new form of rubber. Like, that just
yeah.
seems to be what they were doing and like,
Yeah, and the
I improved the
Curies.
transparency of glass.
Yeah.
Like that seems to be what he had in mind. And
Mhm,
by, nowadays, like, I mean, what that doesn't exist. That's not
mhm.
a thing anymore.
Yeah, he had so getting into moving into the prize for literature. I think some of these problems arise in the literature prize, which is that Nobel, I do not think expected the professionalism, or at least the high level of professionalism, the various fields he was given prizes to. He
Would
didn't
develop,
see
yeah.
that
I don't think he
that
saw
would
that. Yeah.
develop. Yeah,
Again,
like
I think he saw it as a dude in his basement
mhm. He saw it like the
messing around, come up
Curies.
with some
Yeah,
cool stuff. Yeah, the Curies, like
the
the
Curies
Curies.
are
I
great
love
because
the
they
description. This book
had
has a great take on the Curies. His description of the Curies is wonderful. Like they have like a shed out back with like they have to keep the windows open because of the noxious smells as they're trying to like
mhm.
distill plutonium, uranium in the backyard. Like that's great. Those are the kind of stuff that the early prize feels like it's got, and even the idea of like the guy who discovers a kuru. It's sort of like, although I think the kuru one's later, but this idea of like somebody just going out into the fields and being like, I figured out how malaria is spread. I mean, like, hey, put up mosquito nets and we're saw. That kind of stuff feels like it's got this celebration of the individual which just flat out makes no sense nowadays. It makes very little sense nowadays for physics, chemistry, and medicine because almost all of them aren't individuals. But literature is an individual still.
Literature is an individual. I will say I think it makes the most sense for physics because I think the evolution of physics, at least in the first half of the prize's history, is a seems to be a history of thoughtful people,
Yeah.
which is why maybe astrophysics doesn't get awards until much later in astrophysics history, just because it requires so many complicated tools in order to do that successfully. While quantum, it seems, requires smart guys with a pencil,
Yeah, I mean that's the Einsteinian kind of thing. It's
basically.
just Einstein was just he was a loner. He sat and he worked by himself and he did all his work by himself for the most part. And that it makes sense for those kind of people. And I'm sure there are still individuals working like that today that it sort of makes sense to, but a lot of this is like I feel like every single time they come out and they give the Nobel Prize for somebody who found some new element that just sits at the bottom until they come up with some scientist they want to name it after. And the every single time one of those comes out, they're like, we're going to give it to these three people. I'm like, there were so many people who clearly worked on that. You gave it to the three leaders of the project. I'm very sure they worked very hard to get there, but they didn't really, it's this like, I don't want to do the like you didn't build that road kind of argument here, but you didn't find that by yourself. There was 1,000 people behind you. Even the CERN one with the Higgs boson. It felt like with the Higgs boson one, that's the most recent one that seems of a major sort of world change, or sort of that got a lot of press. Everyone was waiting for the Higgs boson to come out of the CERN, and it's like there were probably 1 million people that in some way contributed to the super collider, that CERN super collider, and you gave it to basically Higgs, I think, and like two other dudes that were involved, like sort
Well,
of the head
they
of the
were the
project. You know what I mean?
conceivers of it, right?
I think
Was
they
it
still
anyone
gave it
at,
to some of the people in the CERN project,
oh,
though,
did
didn't
they?
they?
So who's ever in charge
I
of it?
think
Okay.
they did. I
I
thought they
know
did.
Higgs didn't win it alone, but I thought it was Higgs and other people who had
I thought it was like Higgs,
conceived of
another
it.
guy, and probably the CERN. I mean, I'm assuming the CERN people were probably involved. I don't,
Mhm.
again, you're right. I
Well,
don't
the
know.
CERN, once it was proven in CERN, that's when he got the
Yeah.
prize.
No, I know that, but I
Yeah.
don't know the other, whether I thought somebody from CERN was involved in the winning of the prize.
No.
But I guess, it just feels like a lot of them are very large projects. Again, like my favorite other recent winner of the physics prize is the guy who invented the blue LED. There was like three guys from Japan and they were sort of involved in the blue LED, which is why we now have everything made of LEDs because they needed the blue one until they could until they could actually get all the color spectrum. But I love the idea of like just someone invent the blue one so we can get all of the colors. Like that's just such a classic like little physics thing, and it seems like there were a few dudes who worked on it. So it's not to say that the sort of content of the prize makes sense. Sometimes the scale of it is so much so that how do you give it to only a few people? It's no longer a couple people in their backyards tinkering away. It's no longer a dude going into the jungles and finding the cure for beriberi. Like those are just that's not how the prizes that's not how those disciplines
It,
work anymore.
and they're disciplines, and they're professional disciplines, and CERN is a great example. It is a multi-billion-dollar project that requires probably as much complicated finance as is the complication of the theories that come out of it.
Yeah.
And moving into literature, the literature field, when Nobel was conceiving of this, was pretty, I'd say pretty wimpy. It wasn't very strong. The MLA comes along in the 1880s. I think it was 1883, the Modern Language Association, and starts to give the study of contemporary languages, not Greek, not Latin, some sort of legs and some sort of community to it. But the people that were awarding Nobel Prizes early on were part of a somewhat archaic academy that was mirroring the Académie Française in Paris. And I think what it seems like Nobel was looking at was a sort of gentleman scholar, a sort
Yeah.
of like John Ruskin type, would look at the survey of great works that contributed to the ideal of the human experience, which becomes a very big word in discussing the Nobel Prize. And no one seemed to foresee what was going to happen in the 20th century, which is everything is going to become professional. and including literary criticism. It's all going to become entirely housed in academics and things like that. And yeah, it's not going to be this like gentleman scholar thing anymore. And so that I think was one of the big changes. Oddly enough, I think physics was the like the most Victorian in the 20th century. It seems like physics was at that point where individual geniuses could make big moves working on
Yeah,
their own.
I would
And
agree.
that
Yeah.
lasted the longest. And everybody else, it seems like chemistry went through that period in like the 1880s. And oddly enough, literature went through that period around the same time as chemistry. And the woefully bad Nobel Prize winners in literature early on, the ones we'll be covering in this
Some
next.
of them aren't. We've started reading some of them. They're
We
not.
said, yeah, they're not too
They're
bad.
not. They're not woefully bad. They have their
It's
merits. It's
I
just. I mean,
it's relatively bad. They're relatively
yes,
bad. When you look
compared
at
to
the
what they could have
list,
been awarding.
yeah, when you look at the list, and we're talking about Burton Feldman's book, The Nobel Prize from 2000, and he puts up a list of the people who should have won the Nobel Prize in literature at that time, or people who
The only reason I don't like his list is because he does it later on, and he includes neither Graham Greene nor Isaac Dinesen. He talks about them in the book, but he doesn't include
he
them in this
includes
list.
them.
He doesn't have them on the list. He
Not in that
talks about
initial
them.
list, but he talks about
Yeah,
them as deserving of
he
the
talks about them
prize.
as deserving, but he doesn't put them on the list, and that bugged me. So, I mean, the obvious ones from the early part of the 20th century, they don't give it to Tolstoy. They don't give it to Mark Twain. They don't give it to Ibsen. They don't give it to Chekhov. Those would be the main ones I would say at the
They don't
turn of
give
the
it to
century.
Conrad
Conrad lives a little later though, doesn't he? Conrad lives into the 20s. I mean, Conrad's certainly on there. I don't know if they would have given it this early,
this
but he should
early.
have won it by the 20s.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, there
Um,
was just yeah, an enormous list. Who else? Rilke. Rilke is another one that gets left off. Um, Kafka, though he
there's
makes
no
the
Kafka.
argument
There's no way
that
Kafka. Kafka
Kafka,
couldn't have won. He couldn't
yeah,
have. I
that
get that one. That's
mhm.
that's like trying to argue, that I'm trying to think who else never published until later. That's like trying to argue that what's his name, the guy who wrote Confederacy of Dunces.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, hmm
that's like trying to argue that the Confederacy of Dunces should have won the Pulitzer before he died. I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't published. Like how could he have won it?
hmm
It makes no sense. Like I love Kafka. I think he's one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. But Kafka, he can't. If he maybe had lived and actually published in his lifetime, yes,
Yeah, he
that
could
would have
have.
made sense. But even as you get into the 20s, like they
Mhm.
don't get Virginia Woolf, James
Yeah,
James Joyce being the absolute
who was
biggest
never
oversight.
nominated apparently.
In that I mean that argument is stupid. And they always
Yeah,
point that out that he was never nominated. I'm like, you can nominate your own people. Like you make the list.
yeah,
But the idea that James Joyce never won, that is like Einstein not winning the Nobel Prize. Like there is zero justification for that except stupidity, or sort of, or well, we can get into it. It's not stupidity per se, but sort of narrow-mindedness or short-sightedness or whatever it's going to be. But James Joyce is the biggest failing on there, but there's a
yeah.
lot.
There's a Wolf, Proust. Proust doesn't
Proust.
get it. He's of that next generation. Um, yeah, he says Gertrude Stein. I've read some
I
Gertrude
don't think
Stein.
yeah, I'm not
I'm
buying that
not
one.
I'm not
I'm not buying
entirely
that one.
sure. But or H.G.
The list.
Wells.
I don't think he
I
would
don't
deserve a
think
Nobel Prize. But
I
I mean,
don't think
again,
H.G.
if
Wells.
I
Yeah.
give a Nobel Prize, he probably deserves it more than
Sully
Bartolome
Protos.
Bruno. I mean, that was pretty bad. But there's a number of them where it's like, there were just people that were winning the prizes that weren't justified. And I'm sure, again, if we manage to get through all of them, it's going to be really cool. But he points out some of them. Like my favorite was the one he points out. I don't remember who it was, but it was like three post-war German writers, and two of them died, and then there was a third one, and he says his citation. I think it was in like the 50s and the 60s, and the citation was after the deaths of so and so and so and so. He is the foremost writer of German literature living, and I'm like, so you're even your
Herman Hesse. That was
citation
Herman Hesse. Yeah.
was it has,
hmm
and it's basically like, so you're admitting like if these other two guys hadn't died, they'd have won. But you still living.
Yeah.
So it's like a weird prize
Yeah.
that you're basically going.
Well, that is a tendency that Feldman brings up,
Yeah,
is
he
that they
brings it up. Yeah.
award people who are kind of taking the place of other people, right? Who are standing in lieu of
Or
someone they
yeah,
should have.
someone
This is
else.
what this is kind of what he argues with Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett, who was an assistant to James Joyce, might have been awarded the prize in place of Joyce. I think,
But
however,
Beckett is
Beckett
great.
deserves it
Beckett is
as
great.
well.
And he even makes the argument, he says Faulkner is somewhat in that category
Mhm.
too, but he says Faulkner is one of the greatest prizes they ever gave. And I would absolutely agree with that. Faulkner is 100% brilliant and
And he
deserves
also
the.
gave maybe the best Nobel lecture as well.
Yeah, he and O'Neill give good lectures. O'Neill gives a decent one too. But yeah, Faulkner's I think is the best Nobel lecture. So it's the idea of these guys that they do that, and sometimes they hit gold, like with Faulkner or with Beckett. But other ones, they're not quite seeing where literature is going, or they're not quite appreciating, or they're waiting too long to award it. It's a weird prize, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But it's a weird prize as to why certain people are winning, why other people weren't winning at the time. But even in this book, he kind of dumps on some figures where I'm like, no, you. This is where I kind of I go back to like the argument where he made a couple mistakes in the medicine chapter, and it's sort of like, yeah, you made some mistakes in literature chapter too. He dumps on Heinrich
Solzhenitsyn.
Sienkiewicz. He dumps on Solzhenitsyn. That one I get. I mean, Solzhenitsyn, I like Solzhenitsyn, but Gulag Archipelago is almost unreadable. I don't know anybody who's actually read it, and that's more of a political win than it is a. Again, I really like Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, but it's less of a literary quality than a political prize. Fine, we can go into that when we get to those kind of prizes. But he dumps on Heinrich Sienkiewicz, who we're going to do in a couple lectures. I love Heinrich Sienkiewicz. I started reading him when I was like 12 or 13. He's great. Like that's a really, really great writer. Not really that well appreciated nowadays, but he 100% I think deserves his prize. Or he dumps on Sigrid Undset.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
Yeah, he basically is like, and then there's this weird Sigrid Undset who wrote a couple random books about Norway in the Middle Ages. I'm like, dude, you can't. She's brilliant. And I figured I was like, oh, he's gonna hate someone like Francois Mauriac, and then he's like, and then Francois Mauriac is one of the great winners. I'm like, so you're going to praise Sigrid Undset and be like, no one knows who she is. I'm like, I think many people know who. I mean, not many, but there are people
People
who know
know
who
who
she
she
is.
is.
But I think Francois Mauriac. How many people know who Francois Mauriac is? Have you read any Francois
I have
Mauriac?
not read. I've read Singrid. I've not read Francois
I've
Mauriac.
read some Francois Mauriac, but he's not like I've read Viper's Tangle, but he's not that well known nowadays. So it's sort of like you pick some random ones to dump on and some random ones to praise. So I think I take everything he says with a little bit of a grain of salt. Um, but I don't think he's wrong on his general assessment.
And we should talk about what his general assessment is, because I
Okay.
do think he has a both a philosophy of the or a thesis regarded to the prizes overall, and a thesis regarding the specifically the literature prizes. His thesis for the prizes overall is there's something that people are crying out for, a sort of nobility to rise up. And in the 20th century, you can't really have a nobility that people appreciate in any kind of meaningful way. Even the British monarch is sort of it's appreciated, but it's not really respected.
It's not the same. People aren't turning to the British monarch and being like, "Give us your opinion of
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
world affairs.
Mhm,
Can
yeah.
you tell us what we should do in the Middle East? Can you tell us what we should do here?" People are like, "Put her picture, I guess now his picture on a mug, and
Yeah,
and
there we
and
go.
when you pour hot tea into it, a crown appears." Like, it's like this
Yeah,
is
it's quaint. It's not interesting. And
well,
I,
it's not. It's not that it's not respected. It's that um it's not looked to.
mhm. It's
It's
not authority. Maybe its authority is as a relic of a sort of past, I
yeah.
think.
Whereas I think, but the Nobel Prize is authority based. It's modern authority. This is the modern aristocracy. These are our dukes. These are our earls. This is the, as they say, so many of these. I think he says a number of them would, somebody who won the Nobel Prize in physics would be like, saying in the 80s that he was being asked about Iran Contra or something. I mean, like, I have no idea. Like, why are you asking me this? I won the Nobel Prize in physics. I have no idea. But he goes, once you win, you're just assumed you are now one of the leaders of the world. Everyone asks you everything. You're sort of expected to respond. You now belong to the world. There is this. This is why I think Sartre was kind of full of BS when he rejected the prize and was like, a man should never become an institution. But at the same time, there is a little bit to it, that there is this sense that once you do, you become part of this system and people do buy into it. You become sort of a modern aristocracy. We don't have a global aristocracy. The closest we have is the Nobel Prize. That is something that once you win, if your country puts you on their coinage, they put you on their stamps, and anywhere you go, you are a Nobel laureate. He even uses the word Nobelized, and I don't think that's wrong. Once, people are like they have been Nobelized. That's a verb, just as if you've been knighted, and that's the real authority. Any If there is any global authority, this is the thing. This is the thing that people will give global international authority to.
And it reeks of the, you even have the King of Sweden awards these. So there almost seems to be a handing off of authority from the aristocratic past into the democratic present. That's very odd. It's not odd. It makes sense. And I think that's what his argument is. That is what his argument is for the book overall.
That is what his
Yeah,
argument
it
is,
makes
and it
absolute
makes
sense.
sense. Yeah, I buy it. Like I totally buy it. Given the way people respond to Nobel prizes, given the fact that anybody who's won a Nobel Prize immediately jettisons to the top of a list. People what they even there's one of the guys, which is a sad one. I can't remember who he was talking about. Somebody who was in Nazi Germany and probably should have won a Nobel Prize but hadn't. And he's talking about how he's sitting in the crowd and a bunch of Nobel laureates enter the room. There's like 12 of them and everybody stands up. There's sort of this like it's like a it is applauding, and there's this sort of sense of regalness here. And he apparently started crying, this guy, and was like, I should be there. I should be up there.
Oh, I can't
I
remember who
can't
it
remember who it
was,
was.
but he did get it. He did
He did
eventually get it.
eventually win, but there's sort of this sense though that the fact that like these people enter the room and everyone's and stands, it's like Henry V walking into the room. There's a sort of sense that we we will reject generally aristocracy, or if we accept it, we accept it as a quaint reminder of the past. I still remember when I was in the Netherlands once, and I think somebody mentioned something, and I was meeting with Dutch people, and somebody said something about the king, and I was like, "Oh, you guys have a king? You guys have a king?" And he goes, "Yeah, for some reason there's still a king," and he goes, "He doesn't do anything. I don't know why we got him, but we got a king, yeah." And it was sort of this sense of I'm like, there's it no one really respects the king. It's fun and it's a little reminder of the past and brings in the tourist dollars, and it's a person to it's your head of state. He can entertain visiting diplomats, but there's no sense that there's any sort of value to it. Whereas the Nobel is something people respect. They do. They listen to them in a way that they don't listen to other people, and that's really what an aristocracy is. This is the global aristocracy.
Mhm. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And when we move to literature, his thesis is Feldman again. His thesis about the literature prize and why it's, first of all, his argument is it doesn't make any sense. It works for science because there's a common language with science. There isn't a common language with literature.
I think he's wrong, but that's fine.
Okay, I think there's some value to that, especially if you're awarding prizes in poetry in languages you don't know.
You have to admit that, well, you have to admit that it's a Western based
Yeah,
evaluation system that's going to be biased by language.
yeah.
Like, just admit what it is. The problem is when you try to claim this. I guess it doesn't fit in with the previous one. This isn't a global aristocracy thing. These are writers that appear to have. This is the if you're going to admit what it really is, which is really what it is, are generally speaking, writers evaluated to a Western tradition that have to be available in those languages. I think he makes the example. He's like, there could be a Nobel Prize winning writer who's writing in some dialect of Hindi that is never going to be translated into English. That person can't win. They could be a brilliant writer. They could be wonderful. No one will ever find them and they can never win the prize. You can try as much as you will, you're never going to win it. So we kind of should admit that it's going to fail. We can try our best, but it's going to fail. And you're sort of just hoping to pot shot to find some in the dark. But admit it that you are. But if you really, what it really is either A, people who are of world changing writers, they've changed the world, they've done really, really good writing. Those are some people. And those are the ones that we all kind of want to think that the Nobel Prize is, but they're not all that. Two, they're people that sort of meet a sort of cultural desire at any given point, which is sort of most of them. Or they're people who maybe aren't the best writers of a time period, but they're the most politically relevant writers of a time period, or they seem the most politically challenging writers of a time period. And those are the main
Or
winners,
politically
or
acceptable.
politically acceptable writers of a particular time period. And if we just kind of admit it and say, yeah, that's what it is, it's a good thing to recognize great. This is why I say it's not that it makes no sense. It's a good idea to recognize good writing. But you kind of have to admit that it's really not. It's not. It's no one should ever see a Nobel Prize winner and think that was the best writer living in this year, because it's not. With physics, you might be able to make the argument that these at any given period, all the current living Nobel physics winners are the best living physicists and the best living chemists. No, there is no way at any single period in any point in the Nobel Literature Prizes that you could look at all the living laureates and say those are the best living writers. It's false. They aren't. But there are some good ones in there. So award what you can. It's good to celebrate greatness, but admit that that's not what they are.
Well, his argument is admit that's not what it is, therefore that to a certain degree invalidates the prize, which I think it invalidates the glamour to a certain degree. I think
It
that
invalidates our interpretation of it. It doesn't invalidate the prize.
it doesn't invalidate the prize. I also think the prize has done a lot of good, especially in the last 50, 70 years. I understand the complaints about the pre-World War One prizes, right? Because they are pretty shabby. And especially even if you get into 1945, there's a lot of people missing who shouldn't be. And I also understand the frustration that he exhibits, the Feldman again, that Feldman exhibits with the Cold War trade-offs, where you have one person in the West and one person in the Soviet side, and we keep trading off prizes to make the Soviets happy or to make the West happy. That seems preposterous and kind of stupid. And I think his argument is convincing that that's what they were doing
Yeah,
at that time
it's.
period.
I don't think anybody's questioned that.
No, but I think you also have a lot of authors who otherwise wouldn't be recognized, who I otherwise wouldn't read, except this prize kind of brings them up.
Yeah, I would
I
agree. I don't think I would be. I don't think I would have ever read Selma Lagerlof. Like I think Sigrid Undset would still be around. I don't think anyone would be reading Selma Lagerlof now. But she's around. You can get her in print because of this.
yeah, the Phantom Carriage might be the exception there, but yeah, no, it's she is, and she's worth reading,
Yeah, and
certainly.
that's the thing. She's
Mm,
worth reading. Was she the best writer? And this is why I say it. We just kind of got to admit it. Was she the best writer living at that time period? No. She wasn't even the best female writer living during that time period. There
yeah.
were far better.
Mm.
So we should just admit that. Like she's not. But is she worth reading? Yes. Was she worth memorializing and making sure that she was available to the current day? Yes.
Yeah. And I think even recently, the 2023 prize winner, John Fauci, I read one of his books and learned about this kind of minimalist writing that he seems to be at the head of.
But it's like occasionally they're doing that. Occasionally they're sort of memorializing writers who would vanish otherwise. It's rare. I think there's only one writer I've ever had read before they won the Nobel Prize. Other than maybe Pinter. I guess Pinter would be probably one. I'd read
Hmm.
Pinter before he
I've
won the
read
Nobel
Pinder.
Prize. But Mario Vargas is the only other one that I'd read before he won the Nobel Prize. And that was someone when he won the Nobel Prize, I'm like, that was right. Like, you dang got that one. Like, he is, and he'll be remembered. There's no doubt that Mario Vargas, even if he hadn't won the Nobel Prize, would still be around. His writing is great.
You never heard a Bob Dylan song before 2018?
I'm not,
That
I
kind
was
of.
going to avoid that because
Just a
every single
question
time, every single time we talk about anybody who didn't deserve the Nobel Prize, I'm
that
going to
has to come
point
up.
out and be like, I mean, it's not as bad as Bob
Blah blah
Dylan
blah.
Nobel Prize.
But
That one,
yeah, yeah. Louise Gluck I also read before she won.
I had never read her beforehand, but I
Um,
read her afterwards, and she
yeah,
seems very good.
yeah. I had a few books from her. I'm trying to think. There's another one I've also read in advance of that person winning.
I just think, some of them would be remembered anyway.
Hmm.
Harold Pinter doesn't need a Nobel Prize to be remembered. I don't think, I think 100 years from now, his plays will still be read. I think Mario Vargas Llosa would still be read. I'm not sure about Louise Gluck. I'm not as familiar. I've read her stuff after she
Poetry
won.
struggles. I to endure. I think.
Okay.
Uh,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think, well, yeah, mostly. There are some exceptions, but yeah. So would she still be remembered as a poet in 100 years? Maybe not. But I think some of these people would still be remembered regardless. But there's sort of a value in acknowledging, and this is where the Nobel Prize, it's sort of fluid. It's not a definitive as we are recognizing the greatest thing at any given point. Sometimes it is the greatest person, at a single given point. Pinter or Mario Vargalosa or even Toni Morrison. I like Toni or Seamus Heaney. Some of these are really valuable writers who should be remembered in their time period. And then there's others who are Louise Gluck. Is in 100 years from now, if she hadn't won the Nobel Prize, would people be reading her work? Maybe not, but now they will, and that's a
There'll be
good
more
thing.
attention. Yeah.
And that's a good thing. So like Prudhomme, maybe he should have faded away. But there's still even
Nobody seems to
well,
be reading his work
I
anyway.
couldn't find it. I found one poem. I found one poem by his in translation, and I searched everywhere. I found one. That's really bad. When we get to the Spanish playwright whose name I can't even remember. Uh we're doing one of his works in a little bit. I found one copy of one of his books in my local library system, and I got it, and it hasn't been checked out since 1955. So, and I read it. It's a good play. Would it be remembered otherwise? No. So there's certainly some of them that, and Bob Dylan. Does Bob Dylan need a prize to be remembered? No. Should he be awarded it? No. So there's sort of it runs the gambit, and I guess I like it. It seems very human. It's flawed. It's fails. It's sometimes awarding good things. It's sometimes recognizing bad things. It's remembering things improperly. It's a very human prize.
Mhm. Okay. I mean, that's fair.
So that's why I think it has value, and I don't think it negates its value. It just needs to be honest with what it is, which is it's not crowning the greatest writer living at any given time period. It does not actually recognize the greatest things on Earth that Earth has to offer at this point.
Yeah.
That's fine if it can just admit that. It doesn't. It pretends that it's descending from on high
Yeah.
to give the golden laurels like Zeus, but it's not. But that's again, people are also full of themselves, so maybe that's also very human.
Yeah, that's true. His argument, another argument that he puts forward in that is that the thing that's guiding them and has guided them for quite a number of years, especially the years we'll be looking at initially, is this idea of idealism. And that it's this kind of floating word that has a number of different definitions for different people. And there's one concept of idealism that supposedly came from Nobel, though the person who said it said a person who knew Nobel said it to the person who knew Nobel. So this definition of idealism, which is a sort of atheistic idealism, that apparently Nobel had this concept of idealism as questioning institutions, including state, church, etc. And that was his concept of the ideal. Um, when you move into the idealism of the early committee, I think Paul Afwesen was the first committee chairman who was overseeing these things. We should briefly talk about what the committee is and whatnot, and we'll get to that. That his concept of idealism was looking towards the past, this sort of conservative, pseudo-Victorian, looking towards tradition and valuing those higher ideals as being what we need to award. This is why Tolstoy doesn't win because he has this odd religion, and Ibsen doesn't win because he's immoral.
I mean, Ibsen's great, but he's not.
Mhm.
He
He's
is
not
not.
that.
He's not that.
Yeah, he's not
And
that.
even someone like Mark Twain, especially in his later writings, isn't that. And Chekhov might have won had he lived. He just fortunately dies, and so that's the reason why a number of these early guys don't win.
Yeah, it's there's this kind of active prejudice on the part of this initial man who, really kind of ran the committee for quite a number of years, from 1901 to he dies in 1912. Yeah, this is Paul af Versen, who himself was a nobility. He was a member of the nobility.
Nobility? Oh, how
Nobility.
have we not made that joke yet?
Ah, Viv that. And then,
You didn't laugh, Tom.
oh
You
yes,
didn't acknowledge my joke.
that was a good laugh,
Thank you.
right? Thank you.
That was good. That was a very good laugh. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then he also acknowledges that, like, Feldman then says, like, political idealism comes along. And so in later years, you have people who are given the prize for having the adequate and correct political opinion about something. Or here's that one South African author, who is creating meaningful works in a time of censorship. And it's one of these things where it's like, yeah, that's fine, but does the work have any kind of artistic merit?
Value? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that Feldman sees the problem of the prize also as failing to acknowledge artistic merit. Like that is not always what they're
No.
particularly interested in.
And that's fine. It doesn't need to. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it should include it. You can't give it to really bad writing, but it doesn't need to be the best writing at any given time period. I don't think so anyway.
I think it's impossible to assign the best writing at any given time period
Yeah.
to a particular prize. I think I agree with his frustration when it becomes, well, this person deserves a Nobel Prize because they stood up to
Well,
X,
that's
Y, or
stupid. Yeah,
Z.
that's
That's
stupid.
stupid.
Yeah.
And he calls it basically, it's the Peace Prize with a Nobel, with a literature dressing on it. Right? I think that's kind of
Well, that's his argument about
frustrating.
like the Ezra Pound thing, where it's sort of like, why does Ezra Pound win, but Pablo Neruda, or why does Ezra Pound never not win, but Pablo Neruda does, or that sort of thing. And it's sort of like, yeah, there's some validity there, but they do, you know, so that's true. That's just sort of, but that might just be more of a post-war politics thing, and that's very hard to get around.
I mean, it goes into the 90s, right? I think it goes into with Toni Morrison. I think it's certainly a factor. I think her,
But she's good.
but she's good at what she does, right? Yeah, certainly. But I think
She
that
she
that
has she has merit. I like. I mean, I'm not. I have my own reasons, but I respect Toni Morrison's aesthetic writing. I actually do like her writing. It's just the content doesn't really interest me as much.
or
But I
Herta
do.
Mueller in 2008 or 2009, right? She's a
I never read her,
difficult
but
writer, but she is, German language. I think she's Czech, and she was surviving a kind of totalitarian regime from the Soviets, and her writing reflects
so
that.
then so then that's less interesting.
Post-war,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it continues, and you're seeing it in China. The recent award winner was coming out of communist China.
Fair enough. Yeah. Again, I haven't read them, so I can't comment on like the quality of the writing. The thing that at least I found from the ones I've read so far is even the ones where it's like, oh, I just assumed they were just going to be terrible. Other than Sully Prudhomme, he just seems completely pedestrian. But I've only read one poem and it was completely pedestrian. That's the one that people translated. But they seem to have merit. Like I read them and go, huh, that's a that's a clever piece of writing, even if it's not the best that was available at that time. I haven't found anything yet that was just like, well, this is just terrible. This should never have won. This won because this person was politically convenient. it doesn't ever seem like it's that bad. I don't know. Have you found that yet?
Um, I struggle a lot with John Steinbeck.
I mean, yeah,
And
he's my
especially
least favorite after Bob Dylan is Steinbeck. But
struggle more with Steinbeck than Dylan. But anyway, um, I enjoy listening to Bob Dylan. I don't enjoy reading John Steinbeck. Maybe I'll phrase it that way.
But this is different. I mean, maybe
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I guess I like All
Regardless,
Along the Watchtower, and I like some of them. Maybe if you publish them in a poetry book, I might appreciate them as a piece of literature. I think it was more just
but yeah,
a
the
I think the
point of
Bob Dylan Prize
Steinbeck.
was a grasp for publicity. The Steinbeck thing was a total political thing. It was a total bid to current milieu, and it's oh yeah, he
It's
doesn't deserve that.
frustrating,
And it's a frustrating one because he's a really irritating writer.
yeah. And remember in the book, Feldman points out that the reason they said he won was this had been hearsay, was as a kind of ode to the South. And like apparently he confused the Midwest. Apparently the committee confused the Midwest and the South. They confused the Okie and like the pre-civil rights African American.
I'd also heard that supposedly he won, which could be part of the same thing, that he won in a year in which the other two major candidates were my two favorite losers, people who never won, were Isaac Dinesen and Graham Greene. And supposedly they didn't want to give it to Graham Greene because he's too popular a writer. He's like it would be like giving it to Stephen King. And Isaac Dinesen is another Nord, and they felt like they couldn't get or Danish. He's Danish, but they felt like they couldn't give it to another sort of Nordic individual. And so the idea was like, well, Steinbeck was the compromise candidate for the reasons probably that you're saying that they felt they could justify it. And he's got to be one of the most irritating winners in the English language. Um, Bertrand Russell is frustrating, but he's still a decent writer. Like I still enjoy some of his writing. He's a decent writer. William Golding is close actually too.
Golding is a weird one.
He's
And
another one which is like that that I still remember whenever I got the Lord of the Flies and read that book and then found out he won the Nobel Prize. I'm like, did he write something else that was really
that's what I
good?
thought.
Did he write? I remember getting that
Yeah.
and being like, oh, maybe this is one of these things where this guy has written something like astounding, like
I
like
thought I'm like I have to find the corpus of great William Golding books because there's gotta be gold there if he has
this
this
guy
prize.
gold, and then you're like, nope, this is pretty much the best thing he's got going. And that book is trash. And so it's sort of like there are some bad winners, I guess you're right out there. Like William Golding is high on that list. John
Somebody
Steinbeck
resigned
personally,
for that.
they should. I mean
One
that
person
man,
did, yeah, I
yeah.
think.
And I'm glad someone had some integrity around there because that's a trash win. And Steinbeck I think is also kind of a bad win. There's a few of them out there, but again, I like it's very human. It's sort of just like people they mess up and they pick the they award the wrong things. I just think there's some merit in it if we can admit that that it's a flawed thing and a flawed institution.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think again, I think some of the merit is literary movements that I didn't know anything about.
yeah.
That is really helpful for me. I mean, again, the John Fauci thing, the slow writing, which is this whole movement that's been going on since the 80s. I knew nothing about it until he won the prize, and then I read one of his works and went, "Oh, this is." I don't know if this is something that's going to survive in 100 years, but I'm glad I know about this movement, and I will pick up
Well,
other
now it
books in it.
will.
Mhm.
People will do it because, and maybe not a lot, but people will read it for the same reason that we're going to read, you know, uh, Bjornsteve Bjornson. What's his name? What is his name?
His name is
Bjornsteve
Bjorn
Bjornson.
Sterney Bjornsson.
Bjorn Sterney Bjornson. What?
Bjornsten Bjornsson.
Yeah, him.
Mhm.
We're never gonna get it right. But
Bjornsten Bjornsson.
that guy, I've read one of his books, and I think we're gonna read another one for next week. And it's sort of like because apparently the movie that we were going to watch got pulled from YouTube. Thank you, Google.
Mhm.
So we will, but. I actually kind of liked the book, and I've read a number
I
of
like
them.
that book too. Yeah.
I was trying to catch. I liked it. I would never in a million years read that. Never. And I read it and went, "That's a nice. It's nice. Like it's not. It's not George Eliot. It's not George Joy. It's not George. It's not
Choice.
James Joyce.
Not him either.
Not George Joyce, not James Eliot, but but these are writers that I wouldn't read otherwise, and I kind of enjoy that they're around. Like I kind of enjoy that somebody thought this had value at a certain time period, and I read it and go, not my favorite thing ever, but I like it. Like there's value. Even the Spanish playwright guy that again I think we're doing that the second week, he has value. Sienkiewicz is a totally different story. I think he'd have value anyway. Kipling would have value anyway. Some of Lagerlof would have value anyway. But some of these writers are people who would just have disappeared, and I'm glad someone gave him a chance. And maybe the Ibsens of the world should have won. But if we just had, if the early prize winners were Tolstoy, Ibsen, Chekhov, just sort of this list of people, I'd go, I'm very glad they won. But I would never have been reading Bjornson and Bjornson. I wouldn't have had the chance because he wouldn't be remembered. So there's part of me is glad that some of these writers that would have disappeared from the earth still get a chance to be read. And I'm glad we'll have a chance to see them and see some of their adaptations and see some of their movies and maybe I'll regret that when we have to read Sinclair Lewis. But if you've read Sinclair
I've
Lewis,
read Main Street.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I've done Babbitt,
mm.
but these are, they're fine, but they're not. These aren't brilliant. These aren't brilliant things. But I'm glad we have a chance to do some of these weird lit along with great lit.
Yeah. And that's a good way. Yeah, I think a lot of these initial ones, I don't know how weird they're going to be,
It's
but
not weird, but they're weird that we're reading them. It's not that they're
it's
weird. It's not
we
weird.
otherwise wouldn't be reading them, right?
They're not
We've
esoteric. They're
mm,
just weird. They're weird in the sense that,
yeah, they're time capsule
yeah,
right? They're not ageless. That's what's
no.
kind of interesting about them is they are of an age. They're something that was of great value. I remember when I took I not took taught a 200 level theater class, and I thought I'm going to teach initially they wanted it to be all of theater from the Greeks to the present day, and so I said we're cutting it
You
off
are
at Chekhov.
hauling, yeah.
Yeah, so I cut it off at Chekhov. I said we're not going past Chekhov, and I decided to have like some weird plays that were really popular at the time but aren't really read that much, like Gaslight. Do you know the 19th century American play Gaslight? It's
Based on the
where
movie. Is that the one that the movie?
no, 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 no. It's a
Oh, no, I
different
don't know.
thing. It's a melodrama. It's actually where the convention of the villain tying the girl to the railroad tracks came from.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
and it was a huge, huge hit in New York at the time, in like the 1860s. I think it was
That's
post Civil
great.
War. And so I had to read, and I mean, it's a little bit of a difficulty when you have to like teach a class and talk about it, especially with 20-year-olds who are hesitant to talk anyway. But it was kind of a lot of fun to be like, huh, this was what people were. This was the Titanic or the Avatar of its day,
Well,
right?
that's why I read when I wrote a paper when I was in college on 10 Nights in a Bar Room. Um, and it was so by some estimates the second best-selling novel of the 19th century in America after Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin is the best-selling novel of the 19th century. 10 Nights in a Bar Room, T.S. Arthur is the second best-selling novel of the 19th century. No one in their right minds would read it now. It's a total time capsule, but it is absolutely fascinating to read because it's really cool to get an idea of what people valued in any given time period. And I don't know, I just kind of like the idea of reading this literature that no one would care about nowadays. It's a time capsule we get, and that's why I say weird. It's not esoteric. We're not reading. I mean, Kafka's weird, but Kafka's wonderful. Finnegan's Wake is weird and indecipherable. But these are just they're weirdly straightforward. They're just there's no conflict. I mean, there's a little bit of conflict in Ein Glad Gut. Um, but when we get to New Thompson, and if we get to New Thompson and we do Growth of the Soil, there's literally nothing happens. There's like a couple little deaths and like a couple bad things happen, but like the worst thing a person can do is be like to leave the farm, and then it's like, oh no, they left the farm, like, and then they come back and they're they're wearing their skirts a little higher. Like it's just there's no sense of it. But eventually, once they settle back into the land, everything goes back to normal. And there's just these weird things where it's like I would never have read any of these, but I get to see something really weird from the past, and I kind of like that aspect of it. Just seeing what people valued that no one in their right minds would ever even think about today. But it's fun to see. So I'm glad that the Nobel Prize didn't just give it to Tolstoy and Oscar, because Oscar Wilde was alive too. It's not, but they weren't just being like Oscar Wilde and Tolstoy and Chekhov. They weren't just acknowledging
Ibsen and yeah.
and Ibsen and the clear greats. They were like, no, we're gonna pick some of these oddball guys that we think we like, and I find it very human.
Yeah, a lot of these are people who are French or Norse who celebrate those countries, like the things that people liked back then, right? Even Sienkiewicz was a big seller, wasn't he, in
Yeah,
his
yeah. I
day?
think Quo Vadis is supposedly one of the bigger sellers especially the early 20th century.
Yeah.
I hadn't read Quo Vadis when I was a kid. I read but and again to put it, I read with Fire and Sword when I was like 13, and I tried at the time to find the other volumes of the trilogy, and I couldn't. This is before. I mean, I guess the internet was around, but we didn't have a computer. And I remember going to like the local library and like trying to find copies of his second book, The Deluge in the trilogy. I couldn't find it anywhere, and I just never read the other ones because I couldn't find them. They didn't exist. It was just one of these things where maybe if I really knew how to go through the internet, I could have found it, but I couldn't. I had no idea how to order it, so I never read the other two. But I'd read with Fire and Sword, and now reading Quo Vadis, it's sort of interesting to go back to it. But Quo Vadis was supposedly very, very popular in the early 20th century. So these were things people valued, and yeah, Kipling kind of stands on his own, and there's a certain value to some of these other guys. But it'll be interesting to go through some of these guys. The easy ones are going to be the ones who are clearly great writers and should have won. Some of these other guys, I think part of the debate is going to be why did they win?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like your optimism about this.
I'm optimistic only because having read a couple of them, I was surprised to find value where I thought there was just going to be trash. It's not gold, but
No.
it's not just a slog.
Yeah,
It's
there's
not it's not like this is just like reading like 10 Nights in a Bar Room. 10 Nights in a Bar Room is a pretty bad book. It's not as if I thought we were getting those, and it's not. I'm reading it. I'm like, oh, it's not 10 Nights in a Bar Room. 10 Nights in a Bar Room is a bad book, but it's just a total just melodrama and just very preachy. I thought we were going to get that. It's not so far. So I'm optimistic.
okay. Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. I don't know what we're going to find through the course of this. I would like to, in part, figure out, yes, why are they nominating them and awarding them these prizes? Why this work? Also, I think I'm going to keep in the back of my mind, how do we construct a canon? How do we say this is going to be in the Western canon or not? And the prizes obviously prompt that question because they are
Hmm.
attempting to do that. And I think that added question of would we put this in the Western canon? I don't think so, or yes, obviously, or somewhere in between is interesting. Yeah, like what is the difference here? What is the difference between this thing and what would otherwise canonize it? Because I think the aspect, the the desire to uh, not even the desire, let's say the construction, the canon construction is useful. I think it's very
Hmm.
useful to build canons because I think that's in our literature
It's how
sense.
cultures perpetuate themselves.
Yeah, it's how cultures perpetuate themselves. It is our way with written words of creating a cathedral.
Yeah.
And how we create cathedrals may be a kind of secondary question in the background of this season or this collection of seasons, depending on how we end up dividing this up.
We're gonna have to break it up.
We're gonna have to break it up and take breaks.
I
Yeah.
can't do all of them.
So I do have a proposal of how to break it up. An audience, I'm going to present this to you as well. So I'm thinking 1901 to the war. So 1901 to 1913.
I was gonna say which
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
That's gonna be a short season.
Well, then 1919 to 1945. So I think
That's gonna be a long season.
Yeah, I think dividing that in two, being like 19, whenever the first award, I think the first award after World War One was 1919. So like the a short season followed by a long season, like 1919 to 1941, I think, because they paused them again for
Yeah, I
World
think in
War Two.
41, yeah, around there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm sure there'll be a bunch that'll fall out. And this era tends to be where a lot, apparently, of the this kind of older Victorian idea of idealism is awarded. So there's this sort of shaking off the
In the
past.
early period.
In the early period, it gets less and less so, but it
Yeah,
seems to be something they're fighting with. And then after the war, there seems to be, oh
that's
crap,
modernism. Yeah,
yeah,
it's modernism. Yeah.
yeah. And then, so I'm thinking like 1945 to 1970s at some point as being another season.
Hmm.
Um, this is the modernism, this is the more experimental. And then 1970s into the early to mid 1990s, this is kind of a more practical reset. This is where you're kind of
I
doing,
would love to see if there's a Joseph Brodsky. Does anyone have a Joseph Brodsky adaptation?
oh
Probably not. Have you read
God,
Brodsky?
I have not.
I
No.
like Joseph Brodsky.
Hmm. No, we'll see. And that's where you see a little practical, little kind of dance between East and West going on. And then I think the season after that should be the modern age, the
Yeah, modern age.
21st, late 20th into the 21st century, the post Cold War Nobel. What is that doing?
That's a lot of seasons.
That's a lot of seasons. Yeah, that is.
One of the intermediate seasons, I'm going to propose it right now, is because I just wanted to do this. So we can do all of these. And then somewhere, maybe not between the first and the second, maybe between the second and the third, I'm going to propose people who should have won the Nobel Prize.
That would be fun.
And then we can do like we already did the third man on one of our
We
other
could do
things, but we could
War
do
and Peace, the 1,400 page book followed by the 9 hour miniseries in a week.
yeah, that might push it. But we could do like we could do some Chekhov. We could do some Graham Greene. We could do Babette's Feast. I want to do Babette's Feast. We could do Babette's Feast, but we could do like a few of those guys of the like they should have won things in the middle there because that way we can kind of break. We can get some really we can also get some really fun ones like Mark Twain. I think we should do like a Mark Twain in there and like have some fun maybe between the second and the third.
Yeah,
So.
actually, I really like that. Between the second and the third, who should have
Yeah, I
won?
think we should do
There's a lot there.
people who should have won up until that point. Because if we're up to 1945, I guess we couldn't do like Denison and Graham Greene. But I think a few people, just like get a few people who should have won and get some idea on those. I think that'd be a fun
Yeah, we
project.
can do Denison, but I'm not watching out of Africa again. So we'll
No,
have to
God,
find
no.
a
That's why I
different
said do
adaptation.
Babette's Feast. Do
Yeah.
Babette's Feast.
Mhm. Okay.
Babette's Feast is good. So we should do that one. And yeah, like probably not this Gun for Hire, but I bet there's like a decent version of some of his other ones. Like we should do Brighton Rock. Like Brighton Rock would be fun. They've made two versions of it. They made a new one of it
Oh,
too.
did they?
Supposedly, they made one in like 2010, I think, of Brighton
Mm.
Rock. I
Oh,
love Brighton Rock.
okay. I've not read it. The Quiet American is not my favorite Graham Greene, but it's a pretty good movie.
I haven't seen the movie, but we could do a few of them. We could do like a Brighton Rock and because I've read them all, we don't even have to read them. We could just watch the movie, so it could be a quick week. So it'd be fun.
Very good. I think that is a great idea. We'll put that in for our intermediate after idealist conservatives after 1945.
Yeah, so audience, now you know where we're going for the next 2.5 years. You know what you're listening to for 2.5 years.
We will be taking breaks. I will say we'll be taking breaks between reason why I'm dividing these up into seasons like this is to give us opportunities to do other projects in
I'm
between
gonna
things.
lose my mind if I have
Yeah,
to keep reading
because
all
we
of
have to
these.
we're gonna want to do other things. We might want to do video game adaptations at some point. We might want to do random things that are I think we should do random things that are popular in theater and just drop an episode like that in. But we have a blueprint for, until we're roughly in our mid 50s. So that I'm
We have MapQuest directions, and
yes.
we can we're gonna date ourselves, and we have
Yes.
MapQuest directions,
Uh-huh.
which is very likely we are going to read. We are going to go past our street and find ourselves circling the block a few
Yes.
times.
Anyway, summing up, any other thoughts on the book, on our
Good book, worth the read. Yeah.
I really liked it. I agree with him a lot. The Nobel Prize stuff in economics, I was laughing out loud in that
Yeah. I mean,
chapter.
he's
It's incredibly insightful. Like what he says about Milton Friedman, even I was like, I actually completely agree with that. Um,
yeah, he's a good writer. He's clever. I have a he again, he does make mistakes with some facts, but overall.
yeah, yeah,
And
I would
I don't
recommend
like, I find his kind of dumping on Sigurd Undset and
them.
Heinrich Sienkiewicz annoying.
Hmm.
But overall, good
Yeah,
book, worth
worth
the
it.
read.
Okay. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201 467 8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss the 1903 Nobel laureate Bjornstjerne Bjornson and his work, The Fairy of Solbakken, and the film adaptation from 1919. See you then.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing Synnöve Solbakken by Bjornstjerne Bjornsson.
Good job.
Thank you. Yes, I think I got that
Yeah, it was pretty
relatively
close.
correctly. Our Norwegian listeners can
Norwegian listeners,
correct
please
us.
let us know.
Yes, all of you, please. One at a time, though, I would ask. So I'm going to say we looked at the 1919 movie adaptation of this, and I was thinking, what contemporary director, doesn't have to be contemporary, but what contemporary director would I like to see direct this movie? And you know what I would like? I would like Robert Rodriguez of El Mariachi and Once Upon a Time in Mexico and the Desperado movie to direct this as a sort of contemporary shoot 'em out, sort of somewhat bloody Western. I think that would be a lot of fun. Real nice and campy, completely violates the spirit of the book entirely. Rodriguez worked with Quentin Tarantino on a lot of stuff, so that kind of spirit, like zoom ins, lots of blood. When Knut and Thortjern are fighting, instead of like a gentle knife wound, maybe a decapitation or something like that. I think that would be it would be a lot of fun. You could still have it in the hills of Norway or Sweden, as was filmed in this, but it would be just a complete bloody mess that would be antagonistic to the source material, about as antagonistic as you could be. That would be a lot of fun. How about you, Pat? Who would you like to see direct this film?
I guess I was gonna go with like a serious
Go for it, yeah.
answer.
Mhm.
I was because it could go with what was the guy who did Romeo and Juliet? Playing
Oh, Baz
Baz
Luhrmann.
Luhrmann. That would be a funny
Oh,
one. Baz Luhrmann.
that would be so painful.
It just wouldn't even make sense. But
Yeah.
that was what I thought I would hear your answer.
The
But
Baz Luhrmann Sonori musical.
yeah,
Mhm.
no, I think the legit answer would be, and you could get an Elia Kazan could have done. It's got like it definitely has that sort of rebel without a cause kind of feel to it, or like East of Eden kind of feel. Like it has that it's not dark enough. But it sort of has, I feel like, an Elia Kazan feel to it, the knife stabbing and all this kind of stuff. It sort of has that youthful struggles. Like it just sort of has that Elia Kazan feel to it. So that's what I would go with. I would go with an Elia Kazan.
Yeah, I think that would work nicely because you could get his method acting stuff into
Yeah,
it in a way. And I think that would actually serve this material really, really well.
something would.